Alright. So we'll continue with Ulladu Narpadu. So we've been looking at Ulladu Narpadu and we have covered 26 verses. And we are now going to enter the 27th verse. From verse 27 onward, it is actually called as Vichara Adhyaya. That is, it focuses on the core inquiry. Actually, the way the whole work is organized is the first portion is called Viveka, then Vichara, then Anubhava. That is discernment, inquiry, and realization. But of course, they are all mixed. Every verse, in fact, has all three. The discernment, which leads to inquiry, which leads to realization. And yet, the work is also emphasizing a certain aspect, right? So, it's important to, therefore, recognize the platform on which the inquiry happens, which is the whole discernment of what is true. So, if we really look at it, in fact, the very first verse contains everything, right? And we can just look into that expression to make sure that we are on the right platform of what is inquiry. Because when we say self-inquiry, the word inquiry or vichara in Sanskrit and Tamil too can give the impression of thinking about something, which it is not. It is not about analyzing something. It is not about inquiring in the sense of inquiring about an objective phenomenon. So even scientific inquiry is called as inquiry. That's not what we are doing. What is being done here is inquiring about the inquirer or observing the observer. So for that we need to understand the essence of what is the nature of truth and why it is important to inquire into the inquirer. So we saw in the very first verse just 3 words summarizing everything, where he says Ulladalad ulla unarvu ulladu. So what that expression means is, without a substrate of existence, can there be the sense of beingness? So when we look at our own lived experience, we are normally identified with thoughts, identified with feelings, identified with the body, all of which we are taking ourselves to be me, and this is all part of the various koshas. But the essence of it is that we all feel we exist. There is a sense of beingness. And so the question that is posed as the root of all inquiry is, can we have any sense of being present without an underlying substrate of truth? It is not that there is absolutely nothing and from that magically a sense of beingness comes. So that is one meaning of that expression, is that the sense of beingness which we all inherently feel. Nobody denies that I exist, right? We say I exist, and then we may say there is thoughts or not, we may say I am this or that, but the sense of existence is undeniable. And that sense of existence is therefore pointed out as coming forth from the substrate of truth. And not only that, the same expression has a different connotation, which is that the sense of existence is not different from the ground of truth. So, Ulladalad ulla unarvu ulladu also means that the ground of beingness and the sense of our presence cannot be ever separate. So, a good example to look at it is, if you look at a screen on which we watch, let's say, a movie, both the truths can come out. One is that we cannot watch a movie without a screen, right? So there is always a substrate like a screen on which the movie is being watched. But the other aspect of it is that when we watch the movie, Right there we are watching the screen. It is not that the screen has to be found separate from the movie. It is present as the movie is being played. So both of that is implied by that expression, right? And therefore the core pointer which is set out in the very first verse of the work is that that which is truth is the underlying substrate of our existence, and it is never far from us. There is neither time nor space separating it, because it is the very ground upon which everything happens, just like ornaments and gold. There are many such examples. So when we look at the ornament, we are already looking at gold. It is not that we have to only melt the ornament and then find the gold. Gold is always present, whether the ornament is having a particular shape or no shape, whatever it is. So similarly, the truth that is our pure nature is present whether or not we are identified with form. So therefore, the question then is, how do we realize it? And there also the answer was given, Ullabadi, Ullade, Ullal, Unar. Just simply abide as the very sense of beingness. So when we normally, as we said, relate to anything, we are identified partially as some fragmentary identification, right? We say I am this body, or I am the energy in the body, which is the prana, or I am the mind, which is the various memories that I have, or I am identified with the intellect. All of these things we identify with. So here the core pointer is that all of these come and go, but your sense of existence is common across all of them. And therefore, abiding as the sense of existence will make you realize the ground of beingness. So that's all the core essence of this pointer is, right? And therefore, what was pointed to in the preceding 26 verses was the ways in which we get caught in false ideas and how to be free of them. So the first thing that was pointed out was any kind of philosophy in which we identify, with which we identify, is always going to be partial. So there are many religions that posit, for example, trinities, and we take ourselves to be separate, the world to be separate, God to be separate. So there is three that comes. And there are many such, are the trinity of creation, sustenance and dissolution. So all of these are only perceived as long as we take ourselves to be the body, the mind, and then we project something outside us. So it was pointed out that any philosophy, including asserting even oneness from a thought perspective, is still partial. So the word non-duality is not actual non-duality. Right? When we say Advaita or non-duality, it is only a pointer. If we simply take it as a philosophy and get identified with it and start arguing about it, then we are actually dualistic. So it was pointed out that all philosophies are limited. Next thing that was pointed out was all forms are limited. So when we engage with any form, even of worship, we have to recognize that all forms are, as the expression used was, manomaya kachi. They are all projections of the mind. And if we identify with ourselves as separate from that projected scene, and because of that we have a division, it can be useful to some extent as long as there is devotion to that object of worship. But ultimately the question has to come up as to who is worshipping who. Otherwise there is always this division. So it's pointed out that it's helpful to have devotion, but at the same time, truly devotion is to surrender the one who is devoting, the one who is considering himself to be a devotee. One has to surrender that. And then there was also pointed out the various dualities that come and bewilder us. The most important of them being knowledge and ignorance. So it was pointed out through multiple verses by Ramana Maharshi that what we consider as knowledge and what we consider as ignorance are both within the realm of ultimately ignorance. Because we take ourselves to be the knower, something else outside us to be known. And in this duality, we are operating, identifying ourselves as the knower. But the real question he asks in many of those verses is, who is the awareness in which the knower and the known are both operating. So there is the knower and there is the known, which is the subject and the object. And sometimes there is the knower and there is ignorance, let's say. Or sometimes we will say I know, sometimes we say I don't know. That's why once in a very nice example it happened, somebody said I don't know anything to Ramana Maharshi, and he said, you are aware that you don't know. So who is aware that I don't know? Find that out, right? So the pointer is that the one who says I know and the one who says I don't know are both partial identification. But the awareness in which that happens is full. Because there is no division in awareness. I can know XYZ, which means I don't know something else. There is always going to be limitation in knowledge and ignorance. But when it comes to the awareness, it is free of this duality. Right? It is simply aware of knowledge, it is aware of ignorance, and therefore it is pure knowledge, in that it is never having an opposite called ignorance. It is just pure knowledge that is simply aware. Right? So that was pointed out, and then it was also pointed out regarding time and space. We saw how both time and space are also projections, and when we interact with anyone, anywhere, anytime, we through thought project a movement of time, and this movement of time includes past, present and future, and we are identified with that and we think we are moving through time. But the important recognition that is missed often is that the very movement of time is happening within awareness. So even present, not and certainly past and future are all only there as long as memory operates. Right? So for example, when we go to deep sleep, there is no past, there is no future, there is no present also. There is just no time. It's completely timeless. Right? So time comes into play only when thought comes into play. And thought projects time, including the three tenses, past tense, present tense and future tense. Same with space. So the distance that we perceive, and because of the distance we have a sense of me and the other. All of this again comes forth only because of thought function. Without thought there can be no perception of space either. So that was also pointed out. So thereby in the first 26 verses, the platform is set up in terms of the nature of all of these as how they are not what we take ourselves to be. We take ourselves to be journeying through time. But it is clearly seen through this inquiry that which journeys through time is also only a thought. It's only an image that I have of myself that's journeying through time. But the awareness is not journeying through time. Right? Same is with space. Same is with all these forms we spoke about. So having given all that, now we come to the verse, the primary inquiry, which is the very nature of self-inquiry itself. So we'll go into verse 27. Right here it says, Naan udiyad ulla nilai, Naam aduvai ulla nilai, Naan udikum tanamadai nadamal, Naan udiya tannirappai sarvadevan, Saramal, Tan adu aam tannilayil nirpadevan saatthi. So the meaning of the verse is, the first line itself is very beautiful. Naan udiyad ulla nilai, Naam aduvai ulla nilai. That means the state in which the false I does not rise, and we abide as truth. Naam aduvai ulla nilai. We abide as truth without any false identification. That is the essence, right? To not identify ourselves with a partial fragment of memory as me. This is the primary thing we do, right? Which is that every identity we carry is a fragment of memory. Right? We say any identity we carry. We can say that I am belonging to a particular nation or a particular religion, or we belong to a particular profession, family, everything is only an identity that is coming from memory. And we normally, it is so obvious and yet we miss it, right? Because we identify with it so strongly, and then because of that we build a sense of self around it, and we are either offended by it when somebody insults us in that identity, we are flattered by it when somebody praises for that identity, we are constantly literally becoming subject to other people's opinions because we have invested ourselves falsely in that identity. So we think I am that. So for example, it's seen very clearly in many cases. If someone is too identified with one's country, let's say, and someone insults the country, you are personally offended, and then that results even in fights and so on. Same is true with relations, same is true with anything. There is no ability to be aware of the fact that I am identified, because identification is so tight, right? So that is the core source of ignorance. The core source of our suffering is that I am identified, and then the root of it all is that I am identified with the body. So because I am identified with the body, then of course anything to do with the body seems to be happening so close, and there is always this holding on to it in a very tight way. So all of this is there only because of our false identification with fragments of memory. So here what's pointed out is, therefore the ultimate state is nan udiyad ulla nilai, na maduvai ulla nilai. That is to not be identified with this false fragment of memory, whatever the fragment of memory is, but simply abide as who we are. And how is that to happen? He says, Nan udikum thanamadai nadam. That is, by seeking the source where the I rises. Instead of that, he says, Nan udiya tannizhappai sarvadaya. How do you then, the question is, it's posed as a question, then how will you lose the sense of this false self? Tannizhappai means here this false self, losing the false self. So, how is it possible to be free of the false ego until you inquire into the source of the very ego? And it says, Saramal tan adugam tannilayil nirpadai. And then how does one abide as that? So, in other words, the simple pointer here is the only way to be free of this false self and to abide as who we are is by seeking the very source of this false self. See, what we do normally is, even in spiritual journey, we take ourselves to be a seeker, a me, and then we are looking for various methods or techniques, meditation practices, and there are many meditation practices that are prescribed for that, and all of them have their place. It can help calm the mind, it can help give a certain clarity, but ultimately there is still a separation between the I who is seeking and the goal that is being sought. So the primary and the fundamental question is, who is seeking, right? Without looking into the very source of who is seeking, if I simply take that I who is seeking to be real, then I am always going to be caught in this duality, looking for something outside of me, right? We can even look at it in a very simple way, which is not, because this is not to be intellectualized, it's not to be made complex, it's very simple. The simple pointer is, if we intuitively feel that there is one truth, it's already pointed out, which is God, it is not possible that my existence can ever be separate from that truth, right? It is not possible that there can be an almighty God and I have to find Him as if I am separate from Him, right? That is the core fallacy that that we think we are separate from God and then we are seeking God. Now, everyone in any religion would say that God is omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, right? Which is to say, He is all-knowing, all-pervading, and all-powerful, right? So, if He is all-knowing, all-pervading, and all-powerful, it is a very curious fact that we say that, but then we don't admit that He is pervading my own existence, right? That is as simple as that. If you recognize that God is all-pervading, then He has to pervade your own existence. And the only thing that is most intimate to us is our existence, right? So, God is everywhere. It is something that everyone would admit if they are having any inclination to this notion that there is a truth that is pervading across the whole universe. So even a scientist who may not believe in the word God, they also have an intuition that there is a unified theory, right? That is why they are seeking a unified theory of all physical and all forces of physics. So there is a sense that there is an all-pervading cosmic intelligence, right? Which is manifesting as laws of physics, which is manifesting as every observable phenomenon that science has discovered. So that all-pervading energy has to pervade our own being too. So what we normally do is we are looking for God outside us, and what this is pointing to in a very simple way is the first place to look at is your own sense of existence, because your own sense of existence is the most intimate thing you know. Everything else comes and goes, right? My own body is not intimate because the body keeps changing. The body is not what it was even literally a minute ago, but very perceptibly, when you look at a photograph of even 5 years back, you're not the same. The energy level is not the same. We think our breathing is so close, but our breathing is also external to us in the sense that my existence is aware of my breathing. People may wonder, what do you mean breathing is external to you? Breathing, well, it's happening within me, yes, but prior to breathing is my awareness, right? So I am aware of my breathing. It is not that breathing happens in some vacuum and I'm not aware of it. So there is an awareness in which breathing happens. So therefore the sense of awareness is prior to every other experience. So therefore the simple pointer here is, if you are seeking God, if you are seeking truth, if you are seeking peace, the place to seek is your own sense of existence. Nan udikum tanam means the place where you feel I exist. And where is the place you feel you exist? You feel it in your own heart. Right? We touch our heart, nobody denies that. We touch our heart and say I exist. And therefore that very sense of existence I feel by touching my heart and saying is the place where I have to look. So when I get up in the morning, for example, the first thing that comes up is that very sense of existence. I feel that I exist. Then I perceive time, I perceive space, I perceive people around, I perceive the things to be done for the day, the people in the life, everything, right? But the very first thing that springs up is the pure sense of existence in the heart. And that sense of existence is there all through the day. We miss it. We don't pay attention to it because we are always externally focused. And even when we come to spiritual sadhana, as we said, we are either taking up a mantra, let's say, or we are focusing on some breathing exercise, or we are focusing on some other technique, or let's say we are doing some study, right? Everything we do, we are taking ourselves to be the subject. There is an object of knowledge or object of practice or mantra or form or anything we do, and there is a division. So here what is being pointed to is, what is the very ground of existence upon which all of this is happening? We exist, and therefore we do all of these practices. And that very existence has to be the same source, right? If there is one source which we feel intuitively is the source of the whole universe, the most intimate place in which we can get in touch with that source is our own sense of existence. So that's why it says Nan Udikum Tanamadai Nadam. So if we don't seek that, and if we keep looking outside, then we will never lose the false sense, because Tannizhappu means to lose the false sense of I. As long as I am looking outside, I will never lose the false sense of I. Right? We are only going to be caught in this idea that I am whatever I take myself to be, and then I am looking for something outside of me. So that is why it says to be free of the false sense of me requires us to acknowledge that the sense of me that is rising in the heart as I, which is the source of all these identities, is itself happening spontaneously. So if we really look at it carefully, then we recognize that that very sense of existence is rising spontaneously. Right? So I always assume that I am whatever I am, right? But have you ever looked into who is it that is saying this? We'll say I am saying this. Okay, who is that entity that is saying I? This is the simple question, right? And if we really stop for a second and say who is saying I, then it's something opens up. We recognize that the sense of being present as I is happening on its own. Right? Normally, we saw this in a verse before in Ulladu Narpadu where it says the sense of I is always, it's like the ego is like a ghost. It's holding on to some form. And only through a form it can stay alive. So we don't even examine it. We think I am, as I said, I am the body, or I am a particular nation, religion, whatever it is. But if I really separate all that out and say who is this I, then the I has no place to stand. We saw a nice example, in fact, a very beautiful example given by Ramana Maharshi, where he says, it's like you go to a wedding and he says, someone poses as the friend of the bridegroom, and as long as nobody asks him who he is able to masquerade. The moment they ask who are you, he runs away, right? So it's like that, the ego is like that, right? It's always climbing on top of some false memory and saying this, and we don't examine, we don't question. So here the simple question that is being posed is, who is this I? So that question that makes the fellow run away is the question of who am I? So if you just simply ask this question as to what is this sense of I that is rising spontaneously in your heart, that is making you get identified with these fragments of memory as me. So if you therefore, the process is, that's why the reverse of what we normally do. We normally go outwardly and identify with various things. So if we just go inwardly and separate ourselves out from all these identities and then just stay with the pure sense of existence, then that pure sense of existence, where is it coming from? That's the question. So that leads us to the next verse, which is to abide as he says. It's a very beautiful verse. Ezhumbu mahandai ezhumedathai neeril விழுந்த பொருள் காண வேண்டி மூழ்குதல் போர் பூர்ண மதியால் பேச்சு மூச்சடக்கி கொண்டுள்ளே ஆழ்ந்தறிய வேண்டும் அறி. Then, once you come to this question of who is this I, right? Now you've got a taste of this pure sense of presence, which is not superimposed onto memory, right? So that is the first thing, is to remove any fragment of memory by scrupulously asking, am I that? It's a very simple thing. It's not complex at all, because every memory we have is coming and going. We see that very clearly. But I am here always as I. The sense of I is always here. So if we separate out all of that and just stay with the sense of existence, then he says, abide in it. Here the metaphor given is, go into it like a pearl diver goes inside, right? Like you go into the water with a single pointed focus. So it is not that we just simply understand it intellectually and then say, okay, because that will be only a glimpse into something, and then we come out, and then the pull of the outer vasanas, the memories, will again take us back into identification with the mind, with thought and all that. So here what he points to is, we need to have single pointed focus. So, Elumum Ahanda Elumidathai Neeril, so to dive, so the one who is a pearl diver, he dives into the water and he is completely focused on one thing, which is to go to the floor and find the pearl. So similarly, we have to dive within into our heart. So when we sit in meditation, this is the essence of meditation, is we first, there is always thoughts, right? All kinds of thoughts are coming. So we have to first separate the thoughts out. We just recognize that these thoughts are not me. They are just rising because of the ground of memory. Every thought is simply a reaction of memory. And memory is nothing but conditioning. So we have acquired a lot of memories over time. And every memory has its own energy. And it is coming out based on the stimulus it gets. And when we are even closing our eyes and sitting, there is something that brings up some memory, and we are thinking about it, because we instantly, what we do is, as soon as a memory rises, we don't look at it holistically. That looking at the whole memory is called as full attention. We look at it partially, wherein we just identify with the rising memory, a portion of it as me. We identify it with it as subject, and we then create this distance between us and the object of this memory, and then we are playing with this, right? We say, oh, I have to do this, I have to do that, whatever we are thinking about, oh, I could have done that, I should have done that. So the whole memory that is rising is one movement of memory. But we are identified with that because it is like, it's like a movie is playing on the screen and there are two characters. We identify with one character, and therefore we are looking at the other characters from the point of view of that character, rather than looking at the whole screen. So that is the first thing, is that to not identify with any character as me, but look at the fact that the whole rising of memory is actually then a miracle. It is happening on its own, right? I mean, every thought, if you look at it in the right way, is actually a miracle in its own way, right? We look at thought as a disturbance. And as long as we find it as a disturbance, it seems to be troubling us, right? But if we take a completely different approach and we look at it that every thought is actually an expression of the divine energy. So in Who Am I, in fact, it is said, Ramana Maharshi says, mind is a wondrous power of pure self, right? So it is a wondrous power actually. It is what makes these trees manifest. It is what, so I cannot see what is there as a tree. I say there is a tree, you may say there is a tree, but we actually don't know what is there except what our memory tells us, right? The whole world is actually, we actually saw that in another verse before, that the whole world is rendered in our mind actually. We have an impression that somehow the world is out there and I am here perceiving the world. But the reality is that there is no way for me to know the world without the mind. So therefore the world is actually the mind. It is not that there is a world and there is a mind that perceives it. The world is the mind. To take a very simple example, an ant crawling on the tree will not have the perception of the tree that we have. Right? We think the tree is an objective reality, but it's not. It's only a subjective reality. We all share a certain memory as human beings, so we all think there is an objective tree out there. The same as we have seen this before with colors and with sounds. A dog hears different sounds from we do. There are animals which see only in black and white. Then we don't. So, in fact, it's a great source of curiosity where color is even rendered. We think this grass is so green, but is the grass green, or we are just rendering this green in our eyes? These are all not to, it can itself be a source of getting into a rabbit hole, and that's not the purpose. The purpose is simply to point out that every experience is rendered only by the mind, and it is the mind that is causing the world to appear. It is not that the world has any objective reality outside of the mind, and this is exactly what quantum physics has now come to show as well, that the very observer affects the observed, right? So all of this is only to point out that therefore everything that rises is only a spontaneous power of this infinite intelligence that is manifesting as mind. Right? What we call as mind is, that's why he says a wondrous power, right? So we have this wondrous power in us which is manifesting as thoughts, and thoughts are coming. So if we have a different perspective on thoughts, then we just see that all this thought is happening. So we have to stay with one thought. See, normally what we do is we jump from thought to thought. We don't therefore look into a thought deep enough. All we need to do is, that's why the way of self-inquiry is not to control thought, but it is certainly not to indulge in thought. So it is to look into thought, go to the thinker, and come upon that awareness in which this is happening. So that is what it's meant by Elumbu Mahandai Elumidathiniril Vilunda Porul Kana Vendi. You just stay with that one thought, right? So that requires a great discipline, and that's what it means. Like a pearl diver, it's a matter of life and death for him, right? If he just takes a breath and if he just lets air out or something, so he has to hold it. Earlier they used to do that. Nowadays I think it's not done anymore with the technology that's available. But 100 years back, this was how people would go literally holding their breath and go to the ocean floor and take the pearl out. So the example is given because we have to just have that kind of a single pointed focus to stay with the thought. So then the way of meditation can be very different. You can actually just sit and say, what thought is coming now, right? Take a very curious approach rather than saying I have to be still. When I say I have to be still, you are immediately producing a conflict, right? Something will come and you say, no, I have to not think. That is also a thought. What we don't recognize is that me wanting to be still is a thought, and then I am caught in a conflict between one thought and another thought. It's all I am doing by saying I have to be still. So to be still, as said many times by Ramana Maharshi, Chumma iru. Therefore, it is not a way of imposing stillness. That's the point. It is a way. It is to recognize the stillness by finding the ground of thought.
It's kind of interesting because when you mention all of this, right? I think because the way we live, this is almost a conflict between stillness and awareness, right? Because many of the times when we are the most still, right? Either when we are sitting or we are sleeping, whatever, right? We are not really aware in the sense as how you think of being aware, right? So I think the other practices I've heard of, whether it's looking at the source or whatever, is to not do action but yet be aware. I think that's the toughest.
Exactly. See, the thing is, that's why it's said that being still is a very intense activity, right? It is not about being inactive and dull and all that. It's actually intense activity. See, because when you're still, you are not, as we said, right? It's not about telling yourself you have to be still, right? It is about coming upon that stillness naturally. And how do we come upon it? By taking a completely different approach of, okay, this thought has come, right? We don't have to say, I'm not going to have any thought and I'm going to force into stillness. None of that. You just sit silently and take a very curious approach of, okay, let's see what comes. Okay, a thought comes. Then I look at the thought holistically, right? With like full attention. I don't have a adversarial attitude towards the thought, first of all. That's the first thing, right? In meditation, is not to have an adversarial attitude towards thought, but simply to say, okay, let me look at this thought. And when I look at this thought fully, then I can see that, okay, this thought is coming because there is a memory that is identifying as something, right? Let's say somebody told me 2 days ago that whatever, say, let's say that they said you are stupid for something, just take something very simple, and that bothered you. So now if you look at the thought and say, oh, how dare he say it? This may be a thought that comes, right? But then you look at it carefully and then say, the reason this thought is coming is because there is a memory here that is identified as someone who is not stupid, who is smart, and then it's offended because he's calling me a stupid, right? So it's simple to just look at it rather than getting offended, but to say, look at the whole memory as if it's something like a tree to look at, right? It is not. The reason I don't look at it objectively is because I'm identified partially, right? For me to say, I'm not, if someone calls you stupid, for example, I'm going to look, if I have no connection, let's say, I can look at it objectively and not have any reaction to it. The reason I have a reaction when someone calls me stupid is because I have an emotional investment in a particular identity that is either offended or boosted or whatever it is. So, but if I don't have that and I look at it very carefully, then I say, okay, so this thought has come, and this thought is coming because of the identity that's stored in memory. And then if I look at it carefully, then I say, where is this thought happening? Then we can find that this thought is happening in my awareness. Awareness is prior to this thought, including this identification of being not stupid or smart or whatever. So then that goes away, and what remains is that awareness. And we simply stay with that awareness, right? That I exist is prior to this thought, and therefore you just stay with it. And at some point, thought doesn't arise. But if another thought arises, it is not a problem again. You just have to do the same diligent inquiry till you get to the ground of the thought, which is pure awareness. And when the thought goes away, then you just stay with it. At some point, as he says here, then the source is revealed because you sit. And then the beauty of it is, you recognize when you come upon that ground of stillness in this way, right, that is what you've been seeking for all along, right? That stillness is there within us all the time. The stillness which is aware, not a stillness which is the nature of sleep or dullness. The stillness. So I am completely aware. The thought was looked into, the thinker was looked into, it is dissolved, and there is a still presence. And that still presence is spontaneously rising in me. And there is no volition, right? It is not that I can choose to not exist. There is a sense of existence that's rising spontaneously. That sense of existence that's rising spontaneously is the voice of God in our own heart. That's why Krishna says in the Gita, Aham Atma Gudakesha Sarva Bhuta Shayasthita. It's in fact that verse we quote often because Ramana Maharshi said he picked 40 verses from Gita, right, as his favorite verses. But then somebody who's, this kind of question is always good. He said, I'm very lazy to learn 40 verses, just tell me one verse. And he said this verse, Aham Atma Gudakesha Sarva. This one verse, it's enough to know Gita. So that means that very sense of existence that rises in your heart as I, you come upon that, right? And that's the essence of Bhagavan. So that is why existence is God. And that existence is aware. It's of the nature of awareness. So that is the essence of that verse, is that you remain with that, and at some point you can, it is not anymore just a intellectual or even a inquiry that is dry, but it is full of love, because you come upon the source which is pure existence, and you realize that this pure existence is happening in you. It is happening on its own, and it is the divine presence that is making everything happen. I cannot even take a breath without that. Right? I cannot see without it, hear without it, think without it. Everything is happening because of this divine presence which is announcing itself as I in the heart. And so that is the direct way, more than going to any temple, more than going to any pilgrimage. The most sacred pilgrimage is to go into our own heart. Right? That is why there is a famous verse that Ramana Maharshi wrote in Sanskrit. It says, Hridaya Kuhara Matye Kevalam Brahma Matram Ki Aham Aham Iti Sakshad Atma Rupena Bhati. So he says, it is pure Brahman, the pure divine, supreme being who is in the cave of the heart. Hridaya Kuhara Matye Aham Aham Iti Atma Rupena Bhati. He shines as I. So to find that I who shines in the heart is the essence of devotion, it's the essence of self-inquiry, it's the essence of wisdom, all of this. So to come upon that is the whole pointer. And then the last verse in the sequence, he emphasizes it by saying why that is the true nature of wisdom and not anything external. So he says, Naan endru vayal naviladu lalmanattal நான் என்று எங்கு உண்டுமென நாடுதலே ஞான நெறியாம் அன்று இது நானாம் அது என்று உன்னல் துணையாம் அது விசாரமாமா. That is, normally when we speak of jnana especially, there is a tendency, among many, even many books will say jnana is intellectual and bhakti is about the heart. And this division is a false division. Because jnana is not about the intellect and bhakti is also not about some sentiment. So that is why Krishna says in the Gita very clearly that, and many people ignore this verse for some reason. He says, of all the devotees, the dearest to me is a jnani. So what does that say? That bhakti is jnana. And yet you will see in many books that jnana marga means studying books, doing swadhyaya, reading Upanishads, understanding the meaning and all that. So here Ramana Maharshi, that's why he says that is not Jnana Marga. So he very explicitly says Jnana Neri. Jnana Neri. What is the Jnana Neri? He says to not even utter the word I. Naan endru vayal naviladu ul aalmanattal Naan endru engu undum ena naaduvale jnana neri. He says to find out where the I rises in the heart and to abide as that is jnana. That is the way of jnana. Then he also further he clarifies, because this is what many people ask. He says, Andri idu nanam adi ena unnal tunayam. So he says to simply affirm that I am not the body, I am pure consciousness, I am Brahman, Tattvamasi, Aham Brahmasmi. All of that he says is only tunai. He says that's an aid. It can help you in clarifying the field intellectually, and that is intellectual, but that is not true jnana. So it is good to have intellectual clarity, and to that extent it helps. And one can stay with this. So that's why there it is said Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. Shravana is to listen to this, Manana is to reflect upon it, and Nididhyasana is to abide in that vritti, that what is called as akhandakara vritti or whatever. But that results in true abidance. That is when it becomes immediate. Otherwise, it's still mediated. See, the word immediate is a nice word because it's without mediation. Otherwise, it's mediated. It's mediated through that external knowledge. I've read that I am not the body. I've read that there is Brahman. I've read that there is consciousness. But the curious thing is, who is saying all this? Where is all this happening? So do I need any book, therefore, to find out who am I? Right? This is why Ramana Maharshi was very, one can say, adamant in saying, you don't need any book whatsoever to find out who you are. In fact, when people like Kunju Swami came and said, should I read this Upanishads? He said to him, first you will say, want to read Upanishads. Then you will say, I want to learn Sanskrit. Then I will say, I want to learn Nyaya. Then where is the end? You are here right now. Find out who you are. Now, There is nothing wrong with learning Upanishads or learning Sanskrit, any of that. But one has to be established in that ground, and then this can be a tunai, as he says, it can be a aim. Otherwise, that can become its own sort of project in itself, its own enterprise, and then we just get caught in it, and then we are. The mind is always in the mood of acquiring, right? So it goes from acquiring external property or wealth or power to acquiring knowledge. That is again, that's why it's called a Shastra Vasana. You just want to get more, and then we don't even realize that we are caught in Shastra Vasana when we just get identified with knowledge, and then we are looking at people based on that knowledge, and then we think someone who's got more knowledge is somehow superior. All these divisions come in the mind, right? In a very subtle way. We think, oh, he knows all the Upanishads, so he must be somehow more knowledgeable. But I know only one Upanishad. But the fact of the matter is, the word Upanishad literally means being near truth. Right? So you don't need to know any word, any external Upanishads to know Upanishad. So in fact, the very Upanishads only point that out. Right? They point out there are many verses. So one of the famous ones that's often quoted is Yato Vacho Nivartante Aprapya Manasa Saha. Upanishads say you cannot reach it by mind. You cannot reach it by intellect, by words. Right? So the Upanishads are of course great in pointing out the truth, but ultimately it is only found by going in our heart. This is the most important thing for us to recognize, is that there is nothing outside us that can point us to our true being. And even if we take it purely in a devotional sense, God is all pervading, and therefore He is not to be found in any book. He is found in existence itself. If I can simply turn my vision to divine in everyone and everything, then I find God everywhere. Then there is an unconditional acceptance of everyone, love towards everyone. Many times what happens is, when I am caught in knowledge, you will find that knowledge actually does the opposite. It makes people judgmental. It makes sometimes a sense of either feeling superior to others or inferior to others, saying I have to know this, creating time. Knowledge always creates time. He says I have to learn this, I have to learn that. The fullness of now is missed because of that. Right? That is the most important thing, is that you are already full and complete right now, and yet we think I have to know this, know that. I build this mental model as if I'm learning like a course in some outer discipline. I make it into another course, and then I think I have to learn this and that, and then it becomes another activity in time. So that is why here it says it's only a tunai, it's an aid, it's good. It's good to clarify certain things by reading, but every single verse we read is pointing to our own heart. So we don't have to therefore read tons of verses, read all the verses available. Even in Ulladu Narpadu, we read one verse properly, it's enough. We don't need to memorize all the 40. It's good to memorize all the 40 because it's nice, it's a beautiful work of poetry. But there are so many people who devoted to Ramana Maharshi who don't know a word of Ulladu Narpadu. And they can't even speak Tamil, but they completely understand the silence that's beneath it. Right? So what's important to recognize is that all of this points only to the silence of our own heart. So that's why he says that is primary. Not all these ideas of knowledge and acquisition of knowledge, and then gathering it, quoting it to others, and then creating an identity around it. Then the other thing we do is we create identity, religious identities get created. We think that okay, this religion has this, that religion has this. We don't see the commonality between all of it. we don't see the simplicity of divine presence in the heart of everyone. Right? That's as simple as that, right? Like if you really look at it, that's why one of the beautiful things of Uddhava Gita that Krishna points to is everything, right? Like we have this sound playing now, which is apparently distracting, but that's also an expression of the divine, right? It's just some music playing. Everything is divine, right? So when we look at it, then nothing is a source of disturbance. It's all divine. It's so then we look at everything with the eyes of unconditional acceptance and love, and that begins when we accept ourselves as unconditionally divine, right? So normally what happens is we first judge ourselves because we take ourselves to be, even in this, right? We say, oh, I'm not realized and I have to realize this and I have to, there is this gradation we have, right? And then because of that we judge ourselves, and then we therefore judge others. Oh, he is realized, he's not realized, this is silly, right? Ultimately, that's why Ramana Maharshi always says, you will laugh at the fact that you are looking for realization. Right? You're not, there is nobody who is not realized, right? There is just the one divine playing in all these forms. Right? If the divine plays the role of an ignorant, that's the play of the divine. So that's why the only mystery here is to see the divine through all. Right? Like we saw the example of Yoga Maya. It comes in Bhagavatam, right? So Yoga Maya, she deludes everyone, right? Because everybody thinks I am ignorant, I am this, I am that. But the moment you recognize that she alone is everything, then she immediately reveals her grace. Right? So it's just a beautiful play, that's all, right? It's like somebody said, if someone is taking different roles and trying to scare you, right? You are scared only as long as you think the role they are taking is real. It's like someone gave this example. If someone, let's say, tries to dress up as a bear, come and scare you, you are scared only if you don't know that it's someone acting as a bear. The moment you know someone is acting as a bear, you are not scared. So that's as simple as that. Right? The moment you know that it is the divine playing these roles, there is no judgment, there is no desire, fear, there is no looking for experience, looking for more and more, none of that. You just accept everyone and everything as divine, but that begins with our own heart. We see the divine present in our own heart and see that, there is divinity that is making everything possible here. And that is what's making the whole world function. That is what is appearing as all the people, all the things, everything. Then you recognize the divine here and now. But if we emphasize too much on outer knowledge, that's why he says it can be to put it in right place. And I already said that is the meaning of art. Art is to put everything in its right place. If things are not in the right place, then it creates a chaos. So even knowledge, even scriptural knowledge, has to be put in its right place. It has a role to play for some who are inclined towards it. But it's not needed at all. Ramana Maharshi didn't read anything. And not just so we can say, oh, Ramana Maharshi is special. He was special because he was unique in that he just got it at 16 as a young boy without anything. So that's very rare, and that is certainly an embodiment of grace that came to reveal. But then there are many others too who were with Ramana Maharshi, like Annamalai Swami. He never read any Upanishads. So many are there like that who are all in the same realization. And then there are so many on the other side who can quote Upanishads left and right, and they don't have, because they are caught in that, right? So it's important to recognize that there's nothing wrong in reading Upanishads. It's everything right about it. It's very, very beautiful, the pointers of Upanishads are, but it's important to recognize that they are only pointers. It's like the traditional example that's used, that the finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. So it's still good to have a finger pointing to the moon, but if I mistake it for the moon, then I am confused. So that's why here Ramana Maharshi says it is a tunai, it is an aid, but real jnana neri is this. Then the division goes away. Only then we can understand why Krishna says, my favorite bhakta is a jnani. Otherwise, how does it make sense, right? How does it make sense that somebody who knows all the Upanishads, he's not what Krishna is referring to? He's referring to a true jnani, the one who abides in jnana, not the one who possesses knowledge. Because possession of knowledge is still in the realm of duality. There is the knower and the known. Losing oneself is true jnana. So that's why here he says that is true jnana, and that is the inquiry, who am I? To ask and find out who am I. Then the next, we'll see a couple of verses which are emphasizing this. He says, the next verse 30, Nanar ena manam ulnadi ulam nannave Nanam avantalai nanamura Nanna tondrum ondru tanaha tondrinum nanandru porul undramadu tanam porul. So here he points out that when we do this inquiry and when we come upon this recognition in the heart, then the false I goes away, right? Then we don't identify with anything as me. We see anything that rises, and we don't have this sense of identity built around the ego. So that's what he says by Avantalai Nanamura. So that is, his head falls in shame. Nanam means to shame, So it is like the one who is masquerading as me, pretending to be me. When I really look into the true nature of him, he doesn't exist, right? So that's what is meant by he falls in shame. The false identity, egoic identity goes away. And then what remains is this pure. He says, Nana tondrum ondru tana tondrinum porul pundramadu. So pundra means purna. Purna is the word. So that's the fullness of being. So when the I that is identified with memory, with fragments of ego, is removed and it falls, as he says, in shame, then there is a pure sense of existence that rises in the heart as I. And he says that I is actually the pure essence, Purna, the fullness of being. So the I falls and the true I rises as fullness. And that is why in the next verse he says, Tannai அழித்து எழுந்த தன்மய ஆனந்தருக்கு என்னை உளது ஒன்று ஏற்றுதற்கு தன்னை அலாது அந்நியம் ஒன்றும் அறியார் அவர் நிலைமை இன்னதென உன்னல் என்று உன்னல் எவன். So he says, when that happens, தன்னை அழித்து, that is when this false I is destroyed. See, when we say manonasha, that's why the word manonasha is used, right? Mind is destroyed. So people, many times we get confused by it. What does it mean? Does it mean the jnani has no, can he not think? Of course he can think, right? Otherwise Ramana Maharshi cannot write Ulladu Narpadu. Right? To write Ulladu Narpadu, you need words. Words are thoughts. And he wrote this work. He wrote many works. He used to cook so well. I mean, there are so many things that require thinking, right? So that is not what is the problem. The problem is the false sense of identification that I exist as the doer. That has gone away completely. That's what manonasha means. So normally in the yogic way, they look for manolaya, where there is absolutely no thought. But that is only going to be another passing phase, right? You come out of yoga, you come out of a samadhi, thoughts are going to come back. It's no different from going into deep sleep. It has its purpose. It can at least reveal to you that your existence, when there are no thoughts. But that's still only manolaya, because you are only in a state of suspended thinking. They come back. But the Sahajasthiti, which is what we speak about here, is simply function without the sense of me. The sense of me is the mind. Mind is nothing. Here it's referred to as only the I. The I that is falsely rising as the doer, the thinker, the speaker, the perceiver, that is what is eliminated by this inquiry. And he says, Tannai Azhittu, then that is destroyed. When that false I is, that is Manonasha, then it is Tanmaya Anandaruk. Then they are in bliss. Then there is bliss, because then you see everything and everyone as divine. Everything that rises is divine. Every thought is divine. Every activity is divine. Every perception, seeing this tree is divine. Hearing the sounds, everything is an expression of God. Everything is happening spontaneously. And all of that is happening on the ground of existence, which is divine. Then he says, Ennai Ulladu Narpadu. Then what is there for him to do? Right? Because there is no doer left. There is no sense of doership. Doing happens, but no sense of doership. So this is why again Krishna says in the Gita, see in Bhakti Yoga, 12th chapter, very curious chapter, very beautiful chapter of Bhagavad Gita, right? Krishna first defines a couple of important things in the chapter. One is, first he says, you cannot contemplate on the formless, pure consciousness through thought. Right? He says, Klesham adhikatarastesham avyakta sattva. He says it's very difficult because you are identified with form and you are thinking of the formless, which is what many people do in the so-called path of jnana, which is not path of jnana. The important thing to recognize, Ramana Maharshi clarifies, is jnana is not to think about the formless. Jnana is to lose the false identity that I have form. See, as long as I have form, everything has form. Only when I recognize that I am formless, the formless truth comes into being. So Ramana Maharshi's direct way is to show that you are formless. That's why there is a famous dialogue to once that happened. I think there's a Muslim person who came and said, it is blasphemous to associate form with God. And normally people will argue with such a person. Either you would say, oh, you are right, or you will say you are wrong. But that's the greatness of Ramana Maharshi. He didn't say anything to him about that point. He said, leave that. Do you have a form? See, that question completely stumps the person, right? Then he said, yes, of course I have a form. Then he said, well, then the inquiry begins, what is your form? Then he realized that the body is not your form, thoughts are not your form. Then he realized, actually my very sense of existence is formless. Then that's the formless God you are talking about. So as long as you take yourself to be form, there is nothing wrong in worshipping God with form. So to argue whether God is formed with form or formless is quite silly as long as you take yourself to be having a form. In fact, that is why it is said that actually ascribing form to God is helpful as long as you take yourself to be having a form. Right? And those who think they are worshipping a formless God are also worshipping form. They just worship a form in the form of a name. You say there is no physical form, but a name is also a form. It's a sound form. So you can never conceive the formless through form. And this division people have between form and formless is because we don't even know what form is. Form is just not light. Sound is also form. So name is form. So, but when you recognize you are formless, that's jnana. So that's why Krishna says, going back to 12th chapter, you cannot contemplate on the formless. Devotion is the way. But then what is devotion? Krishna doesn't say in that chapter, curiously, he doesn't talk about japa or doing any kind of puja, any of that. He talks about, in fact, he says, which is exactly paralleling this verse, he says, Sarvaramba parityagi yome bhaktaha samay priya. So Krishna says, the one, like in this verse, Ramana Maharshi says, Ennai Ulladu Narpadu, what is there for him to do? Right? He has nothing, there is no sense of doership, which is what Krishna says. He is a Sarvaramba Paritya. He has nothing to do, the true devotee. And he says, he is my dear devotee. So, again in 12th chapter, Krishna clarifies, though we may miss it when we read it, we don't read it carefully. 12th chapter is describing, is a commentary on the verse earlier that Jnani is my pure devotee. Earlier he says, my 4 types of devotees are there. Of the 4, my dearest is a Jnani. And the entire 12th chapter describes why Jnani is a pure devotee. He is my favorite. He says, Saha me priya. He says, he is my dear. Because he doesn't have anything to do. He doesn't have a sense of doership at all. Sarvaramba parityag. So that's what Bhagavan says here. He says, Ennai uladu ondru yetrudharku. What is there for him to do? There is nothing to do. Tannai alal anniyam ondrum ariyadavar. So he does, so beautiful. He says there is no anniyam for them. There is no otherness for them. Everything, see, that's why even purely as a devotional surrender, pure devotion and jnana, why they are the same? Because even if I say that I am devoted to Bhagavan, the truth is to see that everything is Bhagavan, right? I can never have any division in that. Then there is no anyam again. Everything is Bhagavan, and therefore you take the attitude of love and service to all, including your own. You take care of your own body as divine, and therefore you don't indulge the body. At the same time, you don't starve the body in any way, right? You just take care of the body in the right way, and you do the same with others too, because everything is divine. And so when you have that attitude, there is no anyam, there is no otherness. It's ananya, that's why it's without any otherness. That sense of not having otherness is true bhakti, it's true jnana. So here Ramana Maharshi says, therefore, that is true jnana, is to have no other. That's why there is a very famous quote which even became a meme nowadays, right? Which is somebody, actually it's a real quote, but it became a meme because it's so beautiful. Somebody asked Ramana Maharshi, how should we treat others? And he said, there are no others. That is the perfect example, perfect response, right? Then you treat the so-called others as your own self. There are no others. Normal, see, that's the difference between a saint and a sage. Saints will say, they'll say you should treat others kindly, ahimsa, all of that, which is all very good. But the sage will say there are no others, which finishes everything. Then all these will come naturally. It's not that you have to practice kindness, you have to practice humility, non-violence. All of that comes naturally when you recognize that there are no others. So that's why this verse says that there are no others. That's the simple pointer of this verse, is that there are no others. And that is what all the entire purport of all wisdom traditions is only pointing to that one thing. So that's why in the next verse it says, which is again, it's a good verse to look into because it connects to the other verse on Upanishads. He says, Aduni என்ற மறைகள் ஆர்த்திடவும் தன்னை எது என்று தான் தேர்ந்து இராது அது நான் இது அன்று என்று எண்ணல் உடனின்மையால் என்றும் அதுவே தானாய் அமர்வதா. See, he further clarifies here to add to that verse where he said, it is not jnana to simply affirm I am Brahman, I am Atman, and I am not this, to simply. Here he says, to say I am that, I am not this, is due to weakness, he says. Udaninmai. He says that the one who is weak takes refuge in some knowledge, then affirmation is always an escape. Because it is negation that leads us to truth. Affirmation will always lead us to only some kind of further condition. So if I affirm even that, like here he says, Adu Nan, Idu Andru, I am that. So that's why the word Tattvamasi is not an affirmation as it is normally taken to be. It is a direct recognition of our truth. So by understanding the Tvam, the Tat is revealed. Tattvamasi. It is not that the Tvam is there and it is affirming that I am that. It is that when the Tvam goes, the Tat alone remains. That is what Tattvamasi. You are not what you take yourself to be, you are that. It is not that I am here and I am that. That's why he says, Adinan, I am that. He is due to weakness. He says, Uran in Maya. The direct way is to recognize that I am not all of this that I take myself to be through a direct inquiry, to recognizing that everything that rises as I, including this desire to identify with any form, is simply coming out of memory, including to identify with Brahman or Atman and all of that. Because true Brahman, true Atman is beyond words. The word Brahman is not Brahman, the word Atman is not Atman. It is beyond words. So therefore, that's why there is a different Upanishadic verse. It says, Nayam Atma Balahinena Labhyo. Balahinena Labhyo. There's a different verse. Nayam Atma Balahinena Labhyo. Yeah, a weak person cannot get it. It's a very important, this is why it's Uran in mind. That's exactly that. He says Uran in mind means weakness. Upanishad says the same. Nayam Atma Balahinena Labhyo. The one who is not having balam. Balam here means the inner strength. The strength to go with it. If one is weak, then one takes crutches. And every affirmation is a crutch. So to not take any crutch of any affirmation, but to stand naked in front of truth and lose oneself in truth is the direct way. And that is why here it says, Uran in mind. So if don't be weak who takes a crutch, but find out who you are, because that is the conclusion of all Vedas. Maraihalin Tirpu. It says the conclusion of all Vedas, all Upanishads is this conclusion, that you don't exist as what you take yourself to be. What is there is only the pure being. So instead of that, if you simply take a word and affirm it, then we are being weak inwardly. So it is to not take any crutch outwardly, but go within and find out who we are. That is the essence. So with that beautiful verse, we'll stop for today. And I think all of these verses today, essentially, therefore, we can see point to this simple recognition that our very nature here and now is fullness, is divine, is peace, is awareness. We don't have to go anywhere in time or in space. We don't have to ever postpone it. We don't have to think I have to do this or that to realize it. That is only a thought that is coming forth to create distance, but the very awareness beneath the thought is present even now. So to recognize that the presence that is beneath all thoughts is available here and now, and that very presence is what is manifesting also outwardly as all of it. So from within we go without, then we recognize that everything is divine, and we find God everywhere, starting from our own sense of existence. That is the spirit of true self-inquiry, which is jnana, which is bhakti. That is why all these verses point only to that direct recognition that comes and manifests as true love. It is not about knowledge, but it is about love that comes because of recognizing the all-pervading divine, starting from our own heart. Very beautiful set of verses. We came to 32. This is fine. I think we have 8 more verses. Let's see. No, only 6.
Something.
7. 6 verses.
40, right?
Totally 40.
So 9 more.
8 more. 32. We finished 32. Finished 30.
8 more.
32 is finished, yeah. So from 33, there's 8 more. It's okay, whenever it happens.
We've been given a perfect setup to actually test us. Have you got it or not? In the midst of everything.
Yeah.
You need to set it cut.
They're singing about, I realized they're singing about Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus, yeah. We're talking about Jesus.
Yeah, I heard it.
I
I didn't
figure that out.
Yeah, I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
Stop this recording.